Sweet dreams are made of this.
I've grown up in eastern Kentucky since the age of 1. My family, both sides, have grown up in the rural Appalachias their whole lives. But, as with modern times, moved to the small town nestled here in a valley, situated between rolling hills and deep ridgelines. Where the following stories take place is a rural area, nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It's got a name, and it's considered a county. However, the area where my dad's family grew up in, where these stories come from, is more like a collection of deep ridges and mountain folks than anything else. Just to clear up any confusion that this is an actual town. During the early days of the settlers, these mountains were home to the Cherokee Indians. Many cemeteries in this area actually have around 30 to 40 graves of Native Americans buried there, marked with stones and rocks, rather than a more traditional Indian burial routine. In the 1800s, George Washington's aide-de-camp, Colonial Grayson, was bestowed a 70,000-acre piece of land which, now, is where my town is located. In the 1970s or 80s, my mum and her aunt, along with her small cousins, were driving down an empty road just outside of town. When they came to the top of a hill where an abandoned farmhouse stood, they stopped their car in its tracks. They saw a massive saucer-shaped craft hovering over the house. Frightened, my mother and her aunt booked it out of there at high speed. Scared, they continued down the mountain, back to town. However, when they looked in the rearview mirror, they saw the craft coming after them at a high rate of speed, tailing their car and keeping up with it. They attempted to evade the craft multiple times, but to no avail. It chased them for over a mile back to town until finally, just at the edge of the county road that leads back into town, it finally disappeared. My mother has told this story at least 100 times to family and friends, most of which believe her, as they too have seen strange lights in the sky in and around various areas of the community, though some don't. She drew me a picture of the spacecraft a few years ago, which I still have. It's grey and almost metallic looking. It has red lights on all edges of the bottom of the craft, along with a few green lights on the sides of it. When my mother was a child, old enough to know when something is going on, she was at home with her parents and siblings one night. A man, whom her mother and family already knew and were acquainted with, barged into the house, scared out of his wits. He lived in a cabin deep within the woods some miles away. During his stay there, he reported poltergeist activity, orbs and paranormal activity within the property and the house itself. He would go on to tell my grandmother that reportedly he was tormented all night by a demon who threw pots and pans, glasses, and even furniture at him. This went on for almost the entire night. It would throw them completely out of the cabinets, almost hitting. It also repeatedly started knocking and tapping on the sides of his house, as well as thumping the walls and ceiling. Finally, he mustered up the nerves to utter the Lord's Prayer and attempt to rebuke it in the name of Jesus Christ. This seemed to piss it off even more and caused it to become even more aggressive. Now, it started trying to kill him with heavier objects. He ran from the house and spent around 7 to 8 hours walking through the woods and rural country roads back to my grandmother's house. While on his way to the house, he reported that he could hear footsteps trailing him in the woods and next to the road, but he couldn't see anything. It continued on like this for several hours until he finally reached their house. In the 90s, in town sat a white brick house at the top of a small hill. A man and his wife lived there for several years. The man was in his 40s or 50s, and the woman somewhere around the same age, I believe. Anyways, one day while my mother was working at a local gas station, where the woman also coincidentally worked at, the man called her, saying something was wrong with the gas in the house, and he was going to look at it to see if he could fix it. The gas was located in the basement. He went downstairs, lay on his back, and crawled up under the thing to see what had happened. He lit a match to see better, and immediately the house exploded, sending rubble everywhere and a massive fireball. Smoke could be seen throughout the town. The man's wife, who saw the explosion from the gas station, ran home to discover the house gone and nothing left but its foundations. The man's body, as one might expect in a situation like this, was blown into pieces, with body parts even littering some neighboring houses. Since then, it has become a local legend that the man's spirit haunts the house that was built on the land where the original one stood. The show, Ghost Hunters, or maybe another ghost hunting TV series, actually filmed an episode here because of the experiences by the home's inhabitants. Everything from pots and pans rattling and stuff being thrown around to actual manifestations inside the residence. Where my dad's family lives is up in a series of ridges and hollows that, for the sake of this entry, I will call Webb, Kentucky. My dad's entire lineage has lived there since the 1800s. I have looked into our family tree and it is chock full of history. From an old one-armed Irishman who built the 2-story log cabin where my father's family grew up in, to Native American heritage. The following story takes place at my uncle's house, which is the 2-story log cabin built by said Irishman. My uncle died in 2010 of a massive heart attack on his porch. Since then, it's sat empty most of the time, except for my aunt, my grandma's sister, staying there during the spring and summer. The house itself has had a history of paranormal activity, from disembodied footsteps coming from the upstairs rooms to voices and apparitions. My whole life, my dad and his sisters and brothers had always sworn that the house was haunted by the spirits of my great-grandparents, the one-armed man who built the property, and possibly even my late uncle who died there. But that isn't the only thing that has happened there. Somewhere around the late 90s to early 2000s, my uncle, who loved spending time out in the woods, coon hunting with his pack of hunting dogs, was out one night on one of his nightly hunts. According to my aunt, who heard the story from my uncle, who retold it to my grandparents later on, he was in the woods when something chased him out with great success. He said he could hear bipedal walking, trailing him in the woods. His coonhounds, who were akin to predators, seemed frightened and wouldn't chase after whatever it was. He fled through the woods as he heard whatever it was chasing him from behind. He barely made it home by the skin of his teeth, as whatever it was chased him all the way back to his property. He retold the story to my family a few weeks later while visiting. My uncle, Dad's eldest brother, had moved back to the mountains after some years away in the nearby city. The family kept up with him from time to time, but he seemed to be doing quite well. Unfortunately, however, in mid to late 2016, he was diagnosed with incurable lung cancer and was given only a few short months to a year to live. Seeing as how he didn't want to die in the city, he decided to move back to the hills of home. He spent a little while trying to find a suitable house or trailer to move his family back into. After a while, he finally found one, nestled on a very steep hill, with a gravel road leading up the hill to the house. It sat surrounded by dense dark woods, and a backyard that was walled off by a massive rock face, with even more woods surrounding it. The house was what I would describe as a log cabin type build, with light brown wood covering the outside, and tin or shingled roof. It even had a small hot tub off to the side of the small porch, but it had not been used in quite some time. However, that wasn't the strangest part of the property. In the front yard, in a medium-sized garden that the previous owners had made, sat a grave. Yes, a real grave. It was of a stillborn infant baby, a fetus, who had died in the 1970s or 80s, and had been buried there ever since. I found that extremely odd and unnerving, but the inside of the house didn't fare much better either. Whoever had lived there previously must have left in a hurry, as they left all their belongings behind. A TV, little girls' clothes, dishes were left on the kitchen table. Bed frames were taped together in the bedrooms with only the bedrolls themselves being taken, and a Minnie Mouse TV stuffed into a closet of a back bedroom. And in the backyard was the strangest sight of all. A massive burn pile, made up of furniture and pieces of other objects and personal effects, all scorched and burned black, with a giant circle of black surrounding the pile, signified by a black outline in the dirt. The whole house had a very eerie and creepy vibe to it, like something was wrong there. Very wrong. My father, as a promise to his dying brother, starting work on the house, immediately arranging for satellite TV to be hooked up in the living room, which is where my uncle and his family were forced to sleep while work was underway elsewhere in the house. However, soon this happy abode turned into a living hell. Sleeping in the living room, you would hear footsteps walking across the wooden floors. Doors would open and close by themselves, and shadows were seen. My uncle started seeing a small boy and older man, both in overalls and straw hats, who, after a while there, would torment him, even up to his dying day. His wife, who thought he was going crazy, never knew anything odd was happening. That was until, while at the kitchen sink, she saw the boy in overalls running past the kitchen window. Going outside, nothing was there. After that, his daughter soon started experiencing the oddness of the property. She told her mother that she had been playing with a boy in her room just a short time ago. When going to see what was going on, nothing was there. My uncle was continuously tormented by these spirits, even locking my family, who went to visit him, in the back bedroom out of fear that they would hurt them. Eventually, however, they were forced to finally flee the home, having been run out by all the aggressive activity inside the home. My uncle did eventually pass away in 2017, but the entire time he was there, at the home, he was tormented by the restless spirits of the man and boy. After his death, the family pastor and another preacher went to the property and blessed it, attempting to banish the dark entities haunting the home. They threw holy water on the walls and front and back doors, and ordered the spirits out in the name of Jesus Christ. After that, no one knows for sure if the property ever had any odd activity again. My father would stay the nights at my grandmother's when she was still alive. She died in 2018. Most of the time he would stay with her because she was afraid of the nighttime. She had some form of sundowners and would see and hear things at night, so he stayed to calm some of her nerves at night. This particular night her sister was visiting for the week. He decided to go up and hang out with them for a while and stay the night. Well, at about midnight, or sometime after that, he was awoken by the sound of the garbage being gone through, and a loud thump, as whatever it was, had knocked the lid off the trash can, causing a loud commotion that had woke my aunt and grandmother. As they got my dad up to investigate, whatever the disturbance was out back. Grabbing my grandfather's old shotgun and a flashlight, he opened up the back door and walked out to investigate. Having seen the trash can lid, and that the trash can had been gone through, he walked further out, through the back area, to see if anything was out there. And that's when he saw it. Walking back up the hill and back into the woods was a very large and very tall creature in white, with large red eyes reflecting the light from the flashlight bouncing off it. The creature watched him the entire time as it walked back up into the woods, and then vanished. My dad walked back inside, white from what he had just seen, pale as a ghost. My aunt tried to ask what had happened, and that is when he told her and called my mum on the house phone. Relaying the encounter, my mother had my stepbrother ready to find any odd encounters from the area, and he found one. A man had reported being followed in the woods while he was walking down that same stretch of road one day. He never saw anything, but it was walking with him every step. It was later discovered that there is a legend about the devil himself haunting the woods of the mountains there. My dad and myself went to the rural country cemetery, located in the bowels of the mountains. This cemetery has been there for at least 80 to 90 years. The cemetery sits on a small hill with a very steep road going up, and only a very good truck with four-wheel drive or an off-roading vehicle can get there. It is located in between a four-way, with only one home, a double-wide trailer, located down the hill. It has been empty and for sale for about a year or two, and was empty during the time of our visit. It has a fence encircling it, and two pine trees sitting in the middle of it. That is where my family is buried at. My grandmother and grandfather are both buried there, as well as also my uncle, who had the haunted cabin in the previous story. His ashes are buried there at the foot of my grandfather's vault. 3 other aunts and an uncle are also buried there, as well as my great-grandparents. We got out and went in through the chain-locked gate that you have to pull apart and open from the outside. We sat there at the grave of my grandparents for about 20 to 30 minutes, talking. We sometimes like to walk around the grounds for a little bit before we headed back to town, and today was no different. We walked around looking at the graves from the 17 and 1800s, as well as Cherokee graves marked by rocks at the very back of the cemetery. However, I found something odd on the ground by the flat grave marker of a grave from the 1800s. It was a large, bare footprint, at least 2 times larger than my own. I sat there stunned by what I was seeing. Its big toe was extremely large and round, in the shape of a quarter. Perfectly round. Its arch was very broad and curved very sharply, making the rest of the foot almost look sideways in appearance. Whatever it was there the night prior passing through. I inspected the ground surrounding the rest of the cemetery and saw nothing else. No other tracks, nothing. When I got home, I told my mother what had happened. She seemed to believe me and my father, considering I never had lied about or seen anything like that before, and she could see the amazement on my face. Sometime later, my aunt happened to be visiting, and I told her about the track I had found, and what she told me was very creepy. She told me that when my other uncle, my father's other brother, was out there visiting the graves years prior, he had come home and said that something was in the cemetery. He said he had felt watched and was very creeped out, being alone back there. When my grandmother died in the early winter of 2018, my aunt and uncle moved into her trailer until they could secure a new home and move back from Tennessee to be closer to family. Many people who stayed the night there while my grandmother was alive would swear that my grandfather's spirit, who died of cancer under hospice care in a trailer years prior, was haunting the residents. Strange footsteps in the night, voices, and knocking on the trailer walls would always be reported. My father had even encountered said oddities. The knocking would come from outside, and when looking outside or stepping out there with a gun, nothing was ever there. Prior to my grandmother's passing, my father's only living brother had come to visit her one evening. He said that he had seen my grandfather standing by her with his arm around her and said,
"Son, I'm going to see your mother very, very soon,"
and then vanished. And my grandmother did join him a few months later. That was when my aunt and uncle had moved in. Afterwards, nothing strange happened yet. Eventually, they had found a suitable new home to move into, and on a cold winter's night, in the dead of night with the power to the trailer being cut, as you would expect, given them moving, the power bill didn't need to be paid. We arrived at the home and began moving them out. Boxes of clothes, TV, couch and beds, all loaded into the U-Haul parked in the front yard with the engine running and the keys in the ignition. Suddenly, every light source we had helping us to see suddenly went out. The flashlight we had hung on the front porch facing the front door went out, and the U-Haul's engine completely died. We went back out and turned them back on. However, a few minutes later, it did it again. Everything went black. That is when I started being followed around while inside the rooms of the trailer. I felt like someone was following me around, and I swear at times I would hear a female voice saying, "Hi," as well as a male spirit, which was also heard by my father while in the living room. This continued on, and finally, after everything was loaded into the U-Haul, we regrouped outside getting ready to leave. We were talking out in the front yard, and I swear I could hear someone walking across the hardwood floors in the home. We left a few minutes later. A new family moved in after doing some renovations to the trailer a few months later, and as far as we know, no other paranormal activity has been reported since. My brother and his friend were deer hunting in some woods up in the area close to his home. This was multiple years ago, so nothing recent. They were going through the woods with their guns when, suddenly, they spot something up in a tree, watching them. This thing jumps from the high vantage point. It's at around 10 or 20 feet high and falls all the way down to the ground below without being seriously injured. It was covered in thick, matted hair, and it was on 2 legs. They aimed their guns at it, but the thing screamed at them, though he considered it more like a roar, and charged them. They ran out of the woods as fast as they could. This thing chased them for quite some time before they finally lost it and got back home in one piece. So this is an escalation of activity which actually began last fall, when I felt like I was being watched while walking my children to the bus stop in the morning. I'm fairly used to spoopy stuff, so I generally don't get in a kerfuffle easily. As of the spring, this observant presence began imitating my closest pets, which I was later relieved by finding out my significant other and teenage son had both noticed, and we had each assumed we were losing our minds. We have each heard the distinct, recognizable voice of one of our animals, only to have them be sleeping in our house, or walk up and make it awkwardly obvious that it definitely wasn't them. I only went looking for my pet the first time, and while looking, I got the distinct feeling that it was not my pet, and to get my ass in the house. So we always search the house before assuming someone escaped now. Since then, at times when I hear the calls, I get a chill because it sounds like my pet, but it doesn't feel like my pet, if that makes sense. This happened last night. I have no way to confirm my SO's account, aside from the security camera in the bedroom showing where I actually was and when, including when they called my phone. So I woke my SO up after he fell asleep on the couch. Told him to come to bed around 4 AM. So he's like, cool, I'll be right there. I go ahead upstairs. He calls for me a couple of minutes later, and I don't answer. So he calls my phone twice, and I answered the second time. I was sound asleep. According to the bedroom camera, I had been asleep for nearly an hour at the time he interacted with me. He was extremely unsettled once he realized I had been sound asleep. I've also informed my team that if he hears me calling for him when he knows I shouldn't be home, not to answer and text me instead. So this happened in December or late November 2020. I was a few minutes late for college, and my mum was with me. However, when I arrived, the fire alarm had gone off, and everyone from the main building had evacuated. I didn't know if my building had evacuated, so I went across the road, and in the main entrance asked a staff member what was going on. He told me that it was just the main building that evacuated, and not mine. So I went upstairs and went to my class. Later on I spoke to my mum, and I can't remember if she messaged me or if she told me this when she met me after college, but she asked where I went at the start of the day. I asked what she meant, and she said she saw me walking outside towards another building instead of going to class. She said they had the same bag, clothes, hair, height. They were literally identical. I told her I went to class, and she didn't really believe me at first. But I know I went to class, and eventually she believed me. She probably thinks it was just some strange lookalike, but she doesn't know about doppelgangers and mimics. And after reading some stories on here, and other paranormal posts on Reddit, I'm sure it was something paranormal my mum saw. To make it scarier, I know from folklore that seeing a doppelganger of yourself usually meant you were going to die. However, I didn't know what it meant if someone else had seen your doppelganger. So I searched it up, and it means that the person a doppelganger was impersonating is or will become very ill. I've had health issues all my life, but never anything serious like a disease, and I didn't have any I knew of at the time. However, just a week ago I found out I have gum disease, and it has been causing me to feel nauseous and to have pain in my stomach as well as a sore mouth. I had to go to an emergency appointment with my local dentist. I know that the disease is due to natural causes. However, the fact that my mum seeing the doppelganger meant I was going to be ill is just too much of a coincidence. Due to my OCD, I regularly see hallucinations, and had I had seen it myself, I would think it was a hallucination. However, because my mum saw it, I believe her, because she doesn't have a mental illness, she doesn't do drugs, and hasn't even smoked in over 20 years. She also wasn't drunk, and is not the type of person to make something up. Edit. Someone in the comments told me to add this to the story, so I am. We were not wearing uniforms, because if so, then they could have been someone that just looked like me. We wear our own clothes, and I was wearing a random jacket, some outdated Adidas shoes, and a retro 1980s bag. Also, not many people look like me, and I've never seen someone else at my college that looks like me, never mind wearing the same random clothes. My mum followed them because she was so sure it was me. However, she lost sight of them. Also, I know the doppelganger didn't cause me to have gum disease. I just thought it was a strange coincidence that I had an illness so soon after the encounter with potentially a doppelganger, and that it predicted it. Like I said though, it was probably just a coincidence. So I first have to explain the story as best I can. Basically, my family and I moved into this house a while ago, maybe like 8 years or so. Ever since we moved out, my family swears they keep seeing things around the house. I've actually moved out with my boyfriend not that long ago, but I still visit very often. Very specifically, my family thinks they see a ghost around the house that looks exactly like me, and it's freaking me out. And I know it's not me that they're seeing, because the times where they see this ghost don't make sense And sometimes I'm not even at home. It's happened a couple of times, but I'll just write down a few examples. The first time it happened, I was playing on my computer in my parents' room when I noticed my mum walked down the hallway to my room. She called out my name, and I asked her what's up. She came out really confused because, according to her, she had followed me all the way from the kitchen into the closet in my room. When she got to the closet, there was no one there. I had been on the computer the whole time. I was even on it when I saw her pass her room to go into my own. When she told me this, it really freaked me out. And I just told her I didn't want to keep talking about it. I get scared super easily. The second time, I was helping Mum out with groceries. She was in the garage, bringing bags in, and I was in the kitchen putting everything up. While I was putting something up, she came in all mad, saying that she was struggling to get some bags, and I was just standing beside her, watching her struggle. But that wasn't me. Apparently, I was watching her struggling to pick up some bags from the truck floor. And when she turned around to ask me for help, I just stared her down. Again, that really scared me. Another time, my dad was telling me about something that happened when he was taking care of my sisters while my mum and I were out. Now, my dad does not believe in any kind of ghost or supernatural thing, but apparently, while taking care of my sisters, my dad heard what sounded like someone trying to open the sliding door that leads to the backyard. He immediately got up and went to check on the door to make sure no one wanted to break in or something. But when he got there, the door was shaking by itself very violently. It looked like someone was trying really hard to open the door, and had the lock stick been on the other side to keep it closed, the door would have slid open. It stopped about a few seconds after when my dad got there. Even my dad got scared, and I've never seen him this freaked out before. My two little sisters also heard the door. Now, I had personally never had a supernatural experience in the house, but the first few weeks before I moved out, I was home alone. I was taking a shower, and I heard a huge bang. It sounded like the front door had been swung open, and then, after that, it started sounding like someone was opening and closing doors and cabinets. I was so scared because it sounded like someone had broken into the house. I was defenseless and in the freaking shower. So I got out of the shower, grabbed my phone, and called my mum, crying. All the while, doors and cabinets were still opening and closing. My dad got onto the cameras that they have in the house, and they didn't see anyone. There was no one in the house, and nothing was being moved around. It stopped after my dad said that through the phone. Those are some of the examples of what goes on. It terrifies me to think that one day I could possibly be staring right at someone who looks exactly like me in the middle of the night. I've never seen her, and I don't want to. What could it mean that the ghost looks exactly like me? Background. I was around 15 when this happened. I lived in a house with an upper floor and complete basement. The staircase to the second floor has no door at either ends. The staircase to the basement only had a door at the entrance, only on the first floor. Both staircases were L-shaped and had landings separating the turns. The space where the staircases met was as large as two door frames smushed together. At the time, my mum was busy working on her computer on the second floor. My dad was running an errand, but I didn't know that piece of info until he got home. The doppelganger was posing as my dad. To avoid confusion, I will refer to it as him in my story. My dad will be Dad. Now that that is out of the way, here is the actual story. I went downstairs to the first floor to probably get some water or a snack. I don't remember. As I approached the last few stairs, I caught him exiting the basement. He was standing on the hardwood floor of the first floor, only a step away from the door. Being the nice daughter I was, I went to say hi instead of doing my task. As I approached him, he went back down the stairs to the basement at a familiar pace. He wasn't rushed or anything like that when he descended the stairs. Him didn't say a single word to me. I was confused but thought nothing of it. I followed him, but I stopped by the door frame. At this point, he had travelled a few steps from the door. Him kept eye contact with me, but angled his body in a way that made sure he wouldn't fall. I was in the process of saying hey to him until I was struck by electricity. This electricity felt raw and alluring, though it felt sour and very wrong as it pulsed throughout my body. Like it didn't belong in this universe, but not in the evil sense. This electricity had only lasted for a second or two before fading. For whatever the reason, I couldn't stop talking. It was like my off switch was broken. I knew that I didn't need to fear him, despite that electricity. Maybe that is why I blathered on. Who knows? I certainly didn't. As I continued to talk, our eye contact never broke. Then, I hear my mum yelling down to me. "Who are you talking to?" she asked. I yelled back up, "I'm talking to Dad." After a few moments, I hear my mum walking down to the landing of the staircase leading to the second floor. She told me that Dad was on an errand. Just want to remind you that my eyes remained on him while I talked with my mum. Him eventually reached the landing and had his entire body facing me. Then my brain finally began registering what my mum had said, though that was short-lived when I heard my dad thumping up the stairs to our porch. My mum was walking the rest of the way down and asked me again who I was talking to. Since she was closer, I looked up to her to respond until I heard the doorknob twist. I looked out to the front door, then turned to face my mum and said, "See, I was talking to Dad," or something along those lines. Coincidentally, my dad had just entered the door when my mum had made it to the first floor. The doppelganger was nowhere in sight when I turned my attention back to the landing. My dad looked so confused as to what I said and my mum's stare. Then I quickly went back upstairs, worried about having to explain myself further. That never happened, but I was still very confused about what had just happened. Sometime between my blathering and my conversation with my mum, I was sitting on the floor instead of standing. I also swear that I saw something like worry or surprise register on him after the electricity. It may have also been wishful thinking. I swear to you guys that this is a true story, and I remember it in vivid detail, as you can probably tell by the reading. I also wanted to add that the doppelganger was in a recognizable outfit of a thick, long green and white jersey with faded jeans. My dad wore this outfit often, especially during the winter. My dad was in some sort of long-sleeved red t-shirt and lightly worn jeans. This has never happened before or since, though I would like to say that the doppelganger loves to taunt me from time to time. There are occasions when I hear my parents' voices off in the distance, then being told that they are on some sort of errands. Sadly, I don't have evidence of it being the doppelganger, or a ghost, or something else entirely. Have you guys ever come face to face with a doppelganger? So, a few years ago, I had this strange encounter. My wife is a key element in this, so I'm going to describe her just a bit. She has super long black hair that she always kept in a bun. She wore these pajama pants that were patterned like cartoon sky with clouds and all that. She wore a robe that was red and blue horizontal stripes, Also, she doesn't often smile. So I went to bed with my black cat curled up next to me. My wife stayed up and watched TV. I dreamt I was in hospital with Tyrion Lannister and Lord Varys from the Game of Thrones show, and there's a sick man in the bed. I decided to go wait in the car, and while I'm waiting, a tornado comes and I wake up. Now, when I wake up, I notice my wife is lying across my legs, staring at me and smiling. And I thought, WTF is she doing? She's so weird sometimes. Because sometimes she might do weird stuff like that. So I started to tell her about my dream. She's smiling at me the whole time with her head tilted down slightly, ominously, and I suddenly noticed that my cat is gone. I didn't say anything about it, but then my wife says, I put her in leeches, and starts gently tickling my belly with long, sharp nails. I chuckled and said, what? And she said it again, tickling my belly, and I noticed that her robe and pants pattern was swapped, and her hair was down and not in a bun. Then I noticed her smile was just a tad wider than it should be, and I started to become terrified and woke up again, my cat curled up next to me. The strange thing is that I'm not the only one who has encountered this entity. 2 others have also seen this wicked version of my wife in a semi-dreamlike state. I swear to the gods that I was awake during this encounter. Nothing about it felt like a dream, but I woke up a second time. That's never happened to me before. Has anyone else had an encounter like this before? These are 2 eerily similar doppelganger experiences. My earliest encounter occurred around 3 or 4 years ago. I decided to stay with my aunt. Her house was big, with 3 baths and various rooms. I was on the 2nd floor, alone, when everything happened. So, I was working on a video when my youthful step-aunt appeared. I followed her into her room, excited to show her what I had done with my phone. My younger cousin was also in her arms. Both of them were female. She wasn't in the room when I walked in. I looked behind the door, thinking she was playing a joke on me. Nobody was present. I dashed downstairs to find her, but she claimed she had not gone upstairs. It was a scary experience, so I stayed downstairs. I had the following incident around 2 or 3 years ago. I'm upstairs in a house by myself once more. My family's home wasn't substantial. My elder sister then arrived, bearing our little sister. I was probably too lazy to fetch something, so I called her from across the room. Before exiting the room, she walked up to the mirror and remained there still without responding to me. I followed her out of the room as she went at a slow pace. She was nowhere to be found. I dashed downstairs once again, where my elder sister was showering. My younger sister was downstairs too, playing with her toys. I was creeped out once more and stayed downstairs. Numerous parallels between these 2 situations made them seem like falsehoods and fables. I was alone in a house that belonged to a relative. The people that came upstairs were all women, and one of them was holding a female toddler. Both rooms had a bed with a mirror pointing straight in the direction of the bed. It happened in the afternoon. And if it's any use, here are some things to consider. My aunt kept my grandfather's ashes in a container at my aunt's house. In the second encounter, the room I was in had 2 Santo Nino dolls that looked a lot like Santo Nino de Atocha and Divine Nino. What does all of this mean? One day, in the March of the current year, I was having a pretty common day in school up until I was supposed to have PE. My school is situated in a building that in the past was a shop. Inside, there are 2 staircases, one leading to the upper level of the school where the teacher's room and most of the classrooms are, and one leading into the basement, where there is the gym, PE teacher's room, one classroom, the dressing room, and a room with tables for table tennis, and another entry into the upper level upstairs. On that day, I was standing near the staircase leading to the basement, and I saw one of the PE teachers talking with a group of other students about activities that they were going to do today. Since my school currently has 3 PE teachers, it's nothing out of the ordinary to see one of them somewhere in the building. This was unusual because the activities he was mentioning were the same ones we did, and by this I mean me and my class, a week or so prior. I shrugged it off with the thought that maybe the group he was talking to did not do them before. To give you a few details about the PE teacher I'm talking about, let's call him L. He wears a pair of blue shoes, blue sports pants, and a sports sweatshirt in the same color. The second thing, not so much out of the normal at the first glance, is the fact that after the conversation I saw L as he was going upstairs, and so I waited for him to return. The bell rang, but he wasn't coming back, so I kept waiting for him. After maybe 15 minutes, a cleaning lady came up to me and asked for whom I was waiting. I told her I'm waiting for L to return, since I saw him coming upstairs, and he didn't come back. The deputy principal overheard the whole conversation and said to me that they were going to look out for him there. Another few minutes pass, and they come back. What the deputy principal said was the most strange thing I had heard that day. She said that L isn't upstairs, and that they can't find him. After a short conversation and some good advice, later I came down to the gym to look for him there, and he was there with the rest of my class. After a short while, the deputy principal comes in and tells L that I was waiting for him upstairs, and that I saw him coming into the upper level. He nodded, but the thing is, he claims that he was in the gym the whole time. I know that I saw him, or something looking exactly like him, coming into the upper level of the school that day, and it never came back. Please help me explain this, or debunk what I witnessed that day. I was 11 years old and in 6th grade when this happened. So, in my school, we used to water some plants around our building every afternoon before going home. We had to get those 1-liter containers. We had to go to the garden in the grade 5 building to the water pump. We have to individually go back and forth 3 to 5 times before having tasks done. As me and my classmates were lined up, I told my friend I'll get more containers, just so we can finish up faster. I went back into our building, and as I was picking up containers, I saw my friend come also. We were the only ones there, so I asked her if she wanted to get containers too, but she was just silent. She just continued to walk up the stairs and into our classroom. I tried to follow her up, but stopped in the middle of the stairs, since I remembered I had to do some watering. When I came back to the garden, I was surprised to see my friend, the same one I just saw in our building. So I said, "Hey, you got here really fast." Her face just had this confused look. She replied to me that she never went out of the line. I told her what happened, but she just laughed. I didn't really press the topic anymore since I don't like being pushy. To this day, I'm still wondering what could have happened to me if I followed that doppelganger into our classroom. This story is from my res, which is called the Gila River Akimel or Atham tribe in Sacaton, Arizona. Us natives use res for short for reservation. When I was 11 years old, I remember my mother and grandmother talking about something creepy that happened to my grandmother, her sister Carol, and Carol's husband, Benny, on a big canal ditch bank on the back roads close to the mountains in our res. Grandma said that they were all totally wasted and driving down the ditch bank, and it was just about dusk and getting dark fast. Grandma told Benny to pull over so they can pee. Grandma said that her and Carol got out of the car to pee near the passenger tail light as they were relieving themselves and singing the classic 90s commercial song, I Feel Like Chicken Tonight, while flapping their arms imitating chickens. Grandma said she heard what sounded like hooves running towards them at high speed. At first, they just thought it was wild horses and continued to take their time. Wild horses run free in our res, so it was not a big deal to see them occasionally. Then Grandma said that the hoof sound got closer, and an overwhelming feeling of dread and fear came over them. As they looked up, they saw what looked like a half-horse, half-man running towards them, smiling wickedly at them. They screamed, sobered up, and struggled to get up and get back into the car, and Grandma said that she nearly fell down the ditch trying to hurry. As soon as they got into the car, they told Benny to floor it fast. Benny was dumbfounded and wondered what the hell they were screaming about. Grandma said, "Look," as she pointed to the figure behind the car. Benny looked and his face nearly turned white as he sobered up in an instant and floored the gas pedal. As they were speeding down the ditch bank, Grandma said that no matter how fast they went, the horseman stayed right behind their car and even ran up to the passenger window to taunt them all by laughing at them, and had a very wicked smile and hateful eyes glaring at them. It was as if the horseman was saying, "No matter how fast you are, I am faster." Grandma said that as they stared at him, an overwhelming sick feeling was upon all of them, and they wanted to throw up because of the smell coming from the horseman. It was a rotting flesh kind of smell. As they pulled onto the main road which leads back to the res, Grandma looked back and said that it was gone, just like that. The next day all three of them were really sick, and they knew it was because of the horseman. A while after that, my Grandma Carol was diagnosed with breast cancer. Grandma said that it was because of the horseman that Grandma Carol got cancer, but we will never know. My grandpa was a pastor of a well-known church on our res for many years. He had unwavering faith and was strong in his beliefs. He told my mother that his neighbor came to him one night asking him to come over to her house because her teenage daughter had been acting weird for weeks. It was scaring her and her boyfriend, and they didn't know what to do. She told my grandpa that her daughter had not eaten in weeks, will not take a bath, speaks in weird languages that they could not understand, fights them, will not let them sleep until she does, which was rare, stares at them with an evil expression, and every night the daughter would make either her mum or her mum's boyfriend walk with her along the ditch banks in the back of their house, which leads to a big tamarack tree. It was always at night and pitch black out as well, which creeped them out more. The girl's mother told my grandfather that every time they got to the big tamarack tree, the girl would stare at it and say, "Can you hear the voices? They are calling me." The girl's mum would say, "No, I don't hear anything," and then would coax her daughter to turn around with her and walk back home. The mum said that many times their daughter would get angry when she was left alone. The mum recalled that she was trying to shower once and remembers locking the restroom door behind her. When she finished her shower, she got out to dry off. She saw her daughter standing there, the door wide open and staring at her menacingly. The mum also said that when they would whisper, or were talking about the daughter privately, or weren't even at home, the daughter always knew what they talked about and would repeat their conversations back to them, which sent chills down their spines. Countless times they stopped the daughter from trying to hang herself. Finally, they reached out to my grandpa for help. Grandpa asked them to bring the girl to his home. He anointed her with oil, and he, my grandpa, and the church began to pray for the girl who was positioned in the middle of them. The girl growled evilly, was very strong, and writhed around uncontrollably. After about 2 hours, the girl's body became limp and she began to look normal again. The parents were so happy and hugged their daughter and thanked my grandpa and everyone present. Grandpa said the girl was happy, was smiling, and even wanted to eat, and went home to bathe. Sadly, about 2 weeks after that, the girl went missing, and could not be found for days. She was found by a stranger, hanging from the tamarack tree, along the ditch bank behind her house. The coroner told the mother that the girl had to have hung herself the day she went missing, due to the decomposition of her body. She was only 12 years old. Later on we found out that the girl had been into occult stuff and would often talk to something unknown to others around her. Grandpa took it hard because he thought the evil was gone from her. It was weird for all of us to deal with, but these situations are not uncommon here on the reservation, unfortunately. This story takes place on a different res, called the Tohono or Atham Nation, which is a sister res to ours. It is a very big res, which borders along Mexico. We call it TO for short. TO is boring. Stores are miles and miles apart. Neighbors are far apart. There are numerous scary mountains everywhere. Witchcraft is prevalent due to evil medicine men and women. And to the natives, it is well known for countless haunted sites. There are numerous places that even the natives will not step foot on, because it is considered sacred or evil. However, outsiders are not welcome to know these sites. My uncle Donovan has a friend from TO named Javier. Uncle said that every weekend Javier would journey back to 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 check up on his uncle who lived there, and to take him food and supplies because he knew it was hard for his uncle to get to town. Javier stayed and worked on another res far from TO res because he had friends there and work was easy to come by. Uncle Donovan said that Javier would leave early in the morning to travel to TO because he had to drive far to get to the very remote part of the res where his uncle lived, and sometimes he wouldn't make it back before dark. So Javier would have to stay the night. One time, Javier asked my uncle if he wanted to go with him to 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 meet his uncle. Uncle Donovan said sure, but wanted to come back before dark because he knew how creepy it gets out in TO. The day they left, Uncle Donovan said that it was mid-afternoon, and he recalls it taking forever for them to get to Javier's uncle's home. By the time they arrived, it was dusk, and a creepy feeling overcame my uncle. Javier's uncle came out of his home and greeted them both and asked them why they came so late. Javier responded with, "We left late." Javier's uncle looked up towards the mountains and motioned for them to come into his small mobile home. My uncle Donovan did not want to stay and even tried to get back into the car to leave. Javier's uncle said loudly, "You can't leave now. It's too late. You will have to stay. Come in now. They are coming." Javier looked at my uncle and said, "We can't leave. Let's go in." As soon as that was said, my uncle could hear what sounded like large flapping wings and talons scraping against each other and coming towards them. They all bolted into the little mobile home, and the uncle told them to be quiet, be still, don't talk, and do not go outside. My uncle was scared and asked Javier what was going on. Javier said he was sorry and would explain later. Before they knew it, the flapping wings got closer, sounding like a tornado as they flew over the house, and the house began to rock, and the windows sounded like they were going to implode. The uncle's little dog yelped and scrambled under the kitchen table out of fear. My uncle Donovan asked Javier's uncle what the sound was. The uncle said, "They come every night, hunting, in packs. They don't bother me, and I don't bother them. My family and I had an agreement with them." My uncle said, "An agreement with who? What are they?" Javier said they're called gargoyles, demons. They live in the mountains close to here, and they have been here for centuries. He went on to tell my uncle that they come out to hunt every night, and as long as they are inside the house, the gargoyles will pass over and not bother them. However, Javier said my uncle's smell was new to them, so they might have been wondering who he was, and that's why they began to shake the house. My uncle was scared out of his mind, and he said that he sat there, in a ball, begging them to go away. After what felt like hours, all the noise stopped, and he could hear them as their wing flaps got further and further away. They all immediately went to sleep. And once dawn broke, Javier and my uncle jumped into the car and left. My uncle told Javier that he never, ever wanted to go back there again. This story is also from my res. My husband's aunt has an old wooden barrack home behind her current newer home that was built for her. He recalls that when they were younger, a lot of creepy stuff would happen to him and his cousins when they were home alone in the old barrack house. One time they were watching TV, and he said his cousin kept looking past him into the kitchen. At first, he didn't think anything of it, until his cousin's facial expression kept looking weirder. My husband asked him what was wrong. His cousin told him to shut up and look, as he pointed to the kitchen. My husband turned and saw what looked like a little man running from the living room into the kitchen and then disappear. My husband's older brother also stayed in the old barrack home, even after the aunt moved into her new home. The older brother always told my husband that he would constantly feel watched, and swears that little things would run over him at night while he was trying to sleep. Many other family members who used the old barrack house confessed that they too saw little men in their house, or would see them running from outside into the home, and were being harassed by them too. When my husband asked his aunt if she knew about the little people, she replied with a calm face, "They've always been here. They won't hurt us if we don't hurt them." And with that, she never ever spoke about them ever again. This aunt is gone now. However, the old barrack house is still standing. No one dares go there. We just leave them alone. When I was a teenager, I was often home alone as my dad spent a lot of his time at our summer cottage with his girlfriend. I was responsible for the house, and if I needed to be informed of anything, my dad would call our home landline phone. Sometimes it would be about how to handle the fireplace on colder nights. Sometimes just to ask if the house was still in working order. One night, the phone rang, and instead of the normal going up the stairs to pick it up, I got a really bad feeling. Like if I picked up, it was going to be really bad. Like I should not answer the phone. I shook the feeling away, because if my dad was calling this late, it had to be important. Only, when I picked it up, it wasn't my dad. It was this not a human voice, saying,
"Hello."
I admit to smashing the phone back onto its holder and not wasting much time to get my shoes and jacket to run out. Yeah, I apparently scare easy. Fast forward 2 years. I'm in my first apartment and I have my own mobile phone. I was walking my brand new puppy when I got a call that went straight to voicemail. I got the same dread feeling, even though it was a sunny day and I was outdoors. I played my message, and I had one from my grandma and one from unknown number. I played both. The one from my grandma was just normal, like, "Call me back when you get this." And then, when it got to the other one, it was the same
"Hello."
in a not a human voice that I had heard a few years ago. I know it sounds ridiculous, but this is 100% true. The only way I can describe the voice is that it was between a growl and a speaking voice. This is something I don't tell people. Not because I'm a believer in paranormal, but because it sounds so weird. I also still don't like to be at my dad's house alone. It's a creepy circus of its own, but the phone calls still bother me, even though it's like 17 years ago.
I grew up in Cochise County, Arizona. Back in 87 or 88, my sister thought that it would be fun to buy a Ouija board and play around with it. I was in the 5th grade at the time, and she was in 3rd. We both used it with our friends, and amazed at the possibilities of reaching out to the dead. Of course, we asked questions about our futures and what heaven was like. I suspected my friend was the one controlling it, as everything from my future sucked while his was on the path of Richie Rich. Everything changed when some of my mom's students came over to hang out. And this was the 80s, so things were different. 2 of my mom's students, we'll call them CJ and JT, adored her. When my sister told them about the board, their teenage minds kicked in. They told us about a spirit named Chris. He was a murder victim that lived in Bisbee from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. I remember him having a sense of humor, and we spoke with him frequently. His accounts of the future was different from my friends. Some of it was over 30 years ago. I can't recall those details as they weren't important. It's what happened after a few sessions. It was a weekend night. My dad was working the late shift, so it was the 3 of us and her 2 students. They were having a session when they contacted something more malevolent. The entity claimed to be Satan himself, and worse yet, it refused to leave. They'd say goodbye and it would just move to no. It was taunting them. Naturally, the students and my mom started freaking out. I remember my mom commanding it to leave and quoting scripture, but it refused. Then it started to spell out a last name. The energy in the room changed. It wasn't cold. It was weird. After a bit, we walked away from it, but I distinctly remember my mom leaving the planchette on the letter R because I contacted it the first letter of my friend's last name. She didn't care. Everyone was spooked. We left the board by itself and went into the family room to decompress and watch a movie. About 30 minutes later or so, the doorbell rings. Another of our students. I invited them in and remembered the board. I checked and I was shocked to see that it had moved to P, the first letter of our last name. I told my mom this and she brushed it off as me doing it to mess around. I think it scared the hell out of her. After that, we tried it again and got a hold of Chris. Immediately the energy changed and felt relaxed and warm. He said that Satan didn't move it, and that he was a pussy. We ended up picking up the board and putting it in a closet in my sister's room. She claimed that she'd hear voices coming from it at night. We ended up getting rid of it after a close family friend who worked in cleansing houses saw it and freaked out. We never had anything else happen after that. Never had anything really before. My parents sold the house in '88 and we moved to a different town. Now, I've always been the one to seek rational explanations for things. This game was invented around the turn of the century, i.e., probably fake. The only thing that I can come up with was that after we left, one of them must have moved it. Or whatever they contacted moved it when we left. When speaking with CJ earlier this month about it, she says she didn't remember anyone leaving the room until the doorbell rang, but she did say that it spooked her. To this day, neither my sister nor I have owned one of those games. So there you go. I do have other instances later that both my sister and I experienced, but that'll be a post for another time.
I'm not too sure where to start. After a hasty move, I ended up living in the projects for a little bit after moving as quick as I could. Nothing was worse than the situation I was in. While I was living there, I met a girl. We hit it off and started dating. Before I knew it, we were in a serious relationship. Neither of us were a fan of where I lived, and one day she mentioned that her dad owned an apartment and a back house on the property was available. I made up a story for my landlord and was able to break the lease without penalty. The back house turned out to be a really nice 2-bedroom unit. It had everything, including washer-dryer hookups, and my own parking spot that had a gate that I could manually open and close and locked with a key. This place quickly felt like home. One day I went to a friend's house. He had another friend there, and they were at his computer watching some Faces of Death stuff. I didn't want to get involved, but my curiosity got the best of me, and I saw a few videos that I really hoped were fake. I wasn't there too long. It was a little too much, so I left. That night, I began having one of the strangest, kind of terrifying, recurring dreams. This went on for weeks. I will do my best to describe everything. It starts in a very dimly lit room from a distance. At least, I think it is. I'm seeing everything in that dream third-person perspective. I'm starting to see shapes in the darkness. I'm starting to hear just like the mantra. It's extremely deep, has extreme bass, and I can feel it through my entire body as the volume increases. Visibility increases as the sound gets louder, and I start to make something out. I'm extremely overwhelmed by the sound and the feelings, but I'm trying to focus. There is a woman that looks naked and flailing around. Everything is dark, but I can make out two figures. As I get closer and the sound gets even louder, it starts getting brighter, but only slightly. Two figures become four, and I'm able to see more, and I realize the woman is flailing because these beings each have a hold of one of her limbs. It looks like she's trying to free herself. She begins screaming violently, and the gets louder and heavier. It begins rattling my soul. I don't know how to describe it, a feeling I experienced in this dream, and this dream alone. She begins screaming even louder. It's clear that this is a very strange ritualistic room, illuminated by several candles. As she screams, I start to drift closer. She's naked. She has what looks like mud all over her body. Something is wrong. She not only is trying to break free, but she's clearly in great pain. As I realize this, her stomach begins to grow, like a sped-up pregnancy. She's kicking and trying to rip her arms away, screaming louder and louder as she grows. When it looks like she's straight up full term and ready to pop, I drift closer. The noise gets louder. I start noticing adult-sized fingers dragging and poking out from the inside. I realize the men are no longer holding her limbs, but instead have her bound by chains, each one holding a chain. She stops fighting and screams even louder. The scream is getting piercing. The sound of the is getting deeper and overwhelmingly loud. And then it happens. Two extremely dark grey hands tear through the woman's stomach, then quickly pulls its hands back in. I'm getting closer. A grey bald head starts rising out of the hole it just put in the woman's stomach from the inside. This thing is rising out of her, its head cocked down. The is getting louder and darker, and I can't help to get the feeling that I'm in a lot of trouble. The figure rises. The woman stopped moving a long time ago, and this thing continues to slowly rise to the sound of the It's a grey figure, some kind of demon. I'm getting closer. I'm getting more terrified. When it's fully free, it's levitating over the body. I get pulled directly face to face to this thing. Its eyes are closed, head cocked down. In an instant, it snaps its head up and opens its eye. It's horrific, glowing yellow. It scares me so bad I wake up. This nightmare would keep me up for the next few weeks. My girlfriend started complaining of the feeling of a cold hand on her feet at night, and soon this was another place she feared spending the night. She felt like something would pick on her at night, like she wasn't welcome. The day I proposed to her proved that she wasn't lying. I made plans to propose to my now wife. I asked permission. I did everything old school. The day I planned to propose, everything was going wrong. My girlfriend's car was suddenly having issues. It died on her 3 times in the same day. This put her in a bad mood. We get to our restaurant for dinner, and it turned out my reservation was booked for the exact time the damn place closes. I still hope someone got fired for that bullshit. Anyways, we leave, and I quickly find a decent place nearby on Yelp. We get there, The food was good, but the place was cramped. There wasn't much space between chairs, so it was impossible for me to get down on one knee. Dinner's over. We get back to my place, and I can't wait another night. I'm proposing now. While we're not in the kitchen, I start telling her that I can no longer wait, gave her a little speech, and got on one knee. She says yes. We're hugging for a while. Then everything in my cupboard proceeds to fly out as if the supports from all the shelves broke at the same time. It looked like an avalanche. It was loud, thunderous, and a bitch to clean up. The night I proposed was also the same night I told her I think I'm being followed. She would stay the night and complain about cold hands on her feet all the time. She assumed that it was me while I was getting ready for work. I would just say, "You're tripping," and then left it at that. The next few weeks, she would say this. I would only have that dream when she was gone. My fiance's jewelry started disappearing. She started getting scratches. Things got bizarre. Not long after, things escalated to WTF status. I'm at my house, alone. I'm having the same dream, but everything is somehow more vivid, more real, more intense. This woman is screaming and screaming, and I'm closer than I've ever been before. And I see the hands in the stomach, and I see the grey head force and rip its way out of her stomach. I'm much closer now. I'm being forced to watch everything. I see her stomach open, and there's blood everywhere, where inside are wiggling live worms. Then this grey thing rockets out of her stomach and opens its eyes, locking eyes with me. It scares me so bad I woke up, but I wasn't ready for what happened next. I wake up from this dream like a straight-up jump scare. I wake up to blood-curdling screaming. I mentioned before that I have my own parking spot. Like I said before, this was a back house, and their parking spot was right next to the back house. The property was fenced in. There was a metal gate that manually opened and closed. I was the only one with a key besides the landlord. The entrance to the spot was from an alley. At night, it was dark and spooky, and sometimes I would be lazy about locking the gate. I snap out of this dream, woken up by fear. Before I catch my breath, my heart skips a beat when I start hearing screaming. I mean, screaming. It's really loud, and I can hear the labor between each breath. I freeze for a few seconds. The noise is coming from right outside my window on the alley side. But it doesn't sound like it's in the alley. It sounds like it's right outside my window. And it dawns on me that I didn't lock the door. I just gave some lunatic the perfect place to bring someone. I have the Wish app. I buy stupid shit like a machete that looks like a samurai sword. So what? I don't own a gun. This is all I have to protect myself, and hopefully it's enough for what I'm about to do. The screaming is so loud, it's terrifying. Someone needs help. I'm on my way. I turn on the light of my room. My dog is looking through the window. She's going ballistic, but she's a chihuahua, so she has to just sit this one out. I open my back door. The screaming continues. I turn the porch light on, and right when I'm about to jump off my porch, I look, and there is nothing there. In fact, from where I'm standing, the screaming is coming from my room. I'm like, what? And run inside. All of the screaming is really overwhelming and disorienting. I ran back to my room. The screams are still loud and piercing, and I don't know what to do. There is no one outside, and no one inside. What is this? Where is the noise coming from? My dog is on my bed growling, but now she looks scared. She's not in attack mode. She's in I'm right where you've got me mode. Completely scared. In the next few seconds, I decide to try to follow the screams. As I get closer, I realize that this is not coming from outside. It's not coming from the window. The sound is close to the wall, but it's also coming from underneath my bed. I'm not that scared. I'm more like, what? How? The floors in my room were tile. My bed was on a metal frame with wheels. I grabbed the bed and easily pulled it away from the wall. The screaming intensified, but after another few seconds, it just stopped. All of this happened in maybe 30 seconds. After that, everything just stopped. As mysteriously as the thing arrived, it vanished.
My experiences with the supernatural are many, and I could tell you all stories for hours. I'll share 3 in this post. I've been able to see and hear them my entire life, and so is my brother, who I'll call Johnny. The house we grew up in was a hotbed for demonic activity. My earliest memory of seeing a demon was when I was 4 years old. I had been sitting at the kitchen table in my childhood home, eating a bowl of cereal for breakfast. This was while my mother was doing her hair in the bathroom, when I heard footsteps coming towards me from the kitchen. When I turned to look, a hooded shadow figure was standing in front of the refrigerator, and I could feel it looking at me. It called itself the Shiver Man, and when it started to move closer to me, I ran past it and into the bathroom with my mom, slammed the door, and locked it. I was utterly terrified when I crawled up on the toilet as my mom asked what was wrong. "Don't open the door, Mom! The Shiver Man is out there and he's going to get me!" She chalked it up to an overactive imagination, and when she unlocked and opened the door, the Shiver Man stepped into the room. His long, bony fingers stretched out towards me, and I backed as far away from him as I could on the toilet, which wasn't far at all. I shivered when he touched me, and he disappeared into the thin air. Some entities stayed in mine and my parents' closets, and I would see them come out at night. I don't know whether it was the same and it just moved closets when I was in the room or if they were separate. When I got older, I asked my friends when they come over if they ever felt strange when they went into my closet, and every one of them said they felt like something was in there with them that wanted them out. For whatever reason, I slept with my walk-in closet door wide open until I was 9. The doors to my and my parents' closets never stayed closed because the part that held them closed in the door frame had been painted over. One night, I had looked at my closet and suddenly a huge demon stepped out. I couldn't see its facial features, thank God, but its silhouette was very clear. It had horns on the top of its huge, round head, a fork in one hand, a knife in the other, and a napkin tied around its neck. As it started walking towards my bed, I gauged the distance between it and me in the door, trying to figure out if I could make it past it so I could get to my parents' room. I finally decided to take the chance, and I bolted from my bed and down the hall to my mom. She let me crawl into bed with her, but I wasn't going to get any reprieve. When I looked into the corner of her room where her closet was, another demon slipped through the crack and into the door. This one was much slimmer. It was probably the Shiver Man because it was slim and hooded, just like he was 5 years prior. When it pointed at me, a swarm of smaller entities emerged from the blackness and lined up around the bed, effectively blocking me in. I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't want to wake my mom up again. I was scared that she would get upset if I woke her up again. I had no idea what to do with these things at that age, so I buried my head under the covers and pressed up against my mom and eventually passed out from exhaustion. The next morning, we went over to my grandmother's for breakfast because one of my auntie and uncles were visiting with their kids, and we didn't get to see them very often. I sat at the table, pushing my fruit around on my plate, trying to make sense of the night before. When my family asked what was wrong, I told them. They all laughed and told me that I was crazy, and I knew I was on my own. I thought I was the only one who could see these things, that no one would ever help me, and no one would understand. 3 years later, I learned otherwise. I had been at a friend's house to play after church when I was 12. For privacy, I'll call her Allie. I remember sitting in her room, talking about demons and what to do if I ever had an encounter with one. I have no idea how we ended up on this subject, but it saved my little brother, who was 10, that night. Allie told me that if I ever saw a demon, all I had to say was, "Get out, in the name of God," and it would have to leave. Later, when I had washed up for bed at night, I just started up the stairs to go to my room when Johnny opened his door and asked if he could talk to me. His was the only bedroom on the main floor. The living room was to the right if you stood facing out the door, and the bathroom was right around the corner to the left. He usually always slept with his bedroom door open. There was an extra mattress on the floor from the sleepover he had with his friends the weekend before, and he had been sleeping on it instead of his bed. I promise those details will be important. He closed the door behind us and we sat down on the bed. "I need to tell you something, but you can't tell Mom and Dad because they'll think I'm crazy," he begged, and I promised I wouldn't. "I know you can see things, so I know you won't think so. The last few days, I've been seeing something follow me," he said. "Whenever I get up at night to go to the bathroom or get a drink of water, I see a big black dog with glowing red eyes come out of the living room and follow me back to my room." I know my eyes bugged out as I recalled what Allie and I had talked about earlier that day, and I swallowed thickly. "Okay," I started, carefully considering my next words. No matter how I put it, I knew what I was going to tell him would terrify him. "Johnny, I don't want to scare you, but I think what you're seeing is a demon." He started to cry, of course. We were only 10 and 12. How the hell are two kids who can see demons supposed to feel when everyone in the family thinks they're insane? Johnny had seen what happened to me when I tried to tell our family what I could see, so he kept his gift to himself. I took his hand in mine. "Look at me, okay? Allie told me today what to do if we ever see a demon. If it comes back tonight, I want you to say, 'In the name of God, get out.' God will protect you, Johnny. He's not going to let anything bad happen to you." He nodded and said, "Okay," and I went upstairs to bed. I should have stayed with him. I don't know why I didn't, but he told me what had happened the next morning. "It came back," he said, but I could see that he felt empowered. "I slept on the mattress on the floor instead of my bed. When I woke up because I had to go to the bathroom, the dog was standing in my room already, snarling and staring at me. I did what you said and I told it to get out in the name of God, and it turned around with its tail between its legs and walked away and disappeared." He threw his arms around me. "Thank you for telling me what to do." Johnny never saw it again. I don't know if it was a hellhound or just a demon manifesting as a giant black dog with glowing red eyes. A few years ago, when I was telling that same story to a friend, he told me that his mom had seen the same dog when she was in high school. She was babysitting for someone and was watching TV after putting the kids to bed. She turned out all the lights, so the only light in the room was the semicircle from the TV. Suddenly, she felt very uneasy. When she turned to look behind her, she saw the big black dog with red eyes pacing behind the couch, growling and trying to figure out how to get closer to her without touching the light. These are only 3 stories of the activity in that house. When I have time, I'll share more of my experiences. I found myself wondering if the people living there now have ever had any encounters with the demons. More specifically, I've wondered if their children have, and if they've seen anything. I worry that they'll end up feeling like Johnny and I did. Like no one in the world will believe them.
I've been an avid camper most of my life. More than that, I actually lived in the Wyoming wilderness for almost 2 years as a child in a house on a nature preserve. A place where electricity was only available by generator, and we had to boil water that me and my siblings carried up from the creek. All of this before I was even 10 years old. If there were emergencies, it would at least be an hour before we could get to help or help could get to us. I've hunted dangerous game. I'm not actually proud of it, but it happened. And I've seen some weird stuff in the desert. So when I say that I will not venture into the woods of the Cascadia mountain range alone, it's important to know that the wilderness doesn't frighten me easily. I was 23 years old when a friend of mine, we'll call him Darren, all names are altered, invited me to a camping trip. The site was a place a few miles up a logging road, so about an hour-long hike from an already backroad as F back road. It was just me, Darren, and his good friend Wade. Place was, from the logging road, about 10 minutes down a trail. The moment we got to the site, I was excited. The small lake was beautiful, barely touched by people over the years. It also comforted me somewhat when we got there to see that within the last month at least somebody else had camped out there. Extra wood by the fire pit. We ate a bunch of chili and hot dogs, but around dusk, the guys went off into the woods and came back with a sealed bucket they had buried the years before, and we opened it up to get into some MREs they stowed in their cache. It was looking to be one of the better camping trips I've had in my adult life. That night was a bit different. For the first time in my life, I felt an uneasiness sleeping in my tent. I couldn't quite place it. Chalked it up to not being used to camping without my dad. Darren brought his .38 special for protection from predators, but he was the only one armed. The next day it rained, and we tried to wait it out, but eventually called it quits, packed up and went home. Fast forward to the next year. Me and Darren get the itch to go camping again, and I wanted to give the site another shot. I spent a great deal of effort convincing a bunch of my friends to tag along. In the end, it wound up being 6 of us and a big white German shepherd. Me, Darren, Wade, James, Charles and Rita, James's girlfriend, and Moogie, the dog. Knowing about the uneasiness I felt the last time, I brought my 12 gauge. James wanted to get some unregulated target practice in, shooting stuff they don't allow at official gun ranges, like full cans and gallon jugs. We also brought a quad up with us this time, so we could haul a bunch of extra water, booze and other supplies to make our weekend more comfortable. First day as we're setting up, we hear a loudspeaker playing some music over by the south end of the lake, which was basically right next to the logging road, and this year could be seen from the road unlike the year prior. So, deciding we're big dick Americans, me and James sauntered down to meet the source of the noise pollution. Now, I have to commend the coolness of the cop that was just having a fishing trip when 2 large armed men, me with a 12 gauge, James with his .308, emerged from the tree line. We introduced ourselves, mentioned the others, but not exactly where we were camping, just that it was nearby. That's when shit started to get creepy. It could have just been cops doing cop stuff, but this guy really wanted to know exactly where we were going to be. Then he mentioned his favorite spots nearby, and really wanted us to try this other spot 2 more miles down the logging road. At a point, it was almost like he was suggesting that was the only spot where we wouldn't be in trouble. Darren showed up finally, told us that he spoke to the landowners several years ago, and they were fine with us being there. Cop was mad, but we lied and said we'd check out the site he was pushing. None of us trusted the guy when we left, so we decided not to. It was like a horror movie setup. The whole shady cop tells us to go to the spot where his hillbilly friends are going to kidnap us kind of vibe. So we move on. Pretty early in the day, so we set up our stuff, get a fire going, float around on a giant 4-person inflatable chair boat thing. Biggest highlight of the day? Charles cut down an entire dead tree with nothing but a small axe, like the midway point between a hatchet and a fireman's axe. An impressive feat of stamina and strength. It was a good day leading to a good night, but right after it got dark, I felt uneasy again. The first thing that worried me was a couple of us heard something big splash into the far side of the lake. We thought maybe it was Moogie, but he was by the fire. his head now perked up and looking in the direction of the splash. Since we were drunk, we thought maybe the floaty thing might be compromised, so we went down with our flashlights to pull it out of the water and onto the bank. Then we heard the owl. James, Wade, and Darren were already passed out by midnight. Rita was humming along by the fireplace with Moogie, and me and James were out getting some more wood so the fire would last. We heard an owl start up its hooting, a cadence I was familiar with in the area, but something was off about it. I have a gift for mimicking bird noises, so what I noticed immediately is the ending hoot was off. Almost always sounds like the owl is rolling its R's as that final hoot of the sequence goes. James, not nearly as outdoorsy as me, says, "That almost just sounds like a person." We joke, listen to it a couple more times. Then I do my own attempt at an owl noise. Silence. For a few minutes. Just as I'm thinking that makes sense because of the noise, it starts up again. But not just one owl. Another started up about half a second after the first. The new owl sounded more like an actual owl than the first one that seemed to have started up again. And after the first hoot from the real owl, the fake one stopped short. "Did that owl just tell the other owl to shut up?" James says to me. I decide to shout, "Better listen to your wife, dude." Immediately after I shout, we both hear a loud crashing, almost identical to the sound of the tree falling that Charles did earlier that day. Moogie starts to go berserk, barking and growling. He had a stink gland issue at this point still, so he was releasing that nastiness as well. He was threatened, and luckily Rita was there to keep him from bolting, because he was. If he really wanted to move, she wouldn't be much of an obstacle. I'm about to shit my pants out of fear. I will reiterate for a fact, I've hunted mountain lions and bears in my life, and at no point during those hunts was I as shaken and genuinely afraid as this. I was paralyzed for like an entire minute. "Whoever that is, you better fuck off. We have plenty of guns," I shout across the lake. Then silence again. Luckily, for the rest of the night, I didn't fall asleep until Darren woke up, basically at sunrise. So I missed breakfast and a morning dunk in the lake the others all did before I got up needing to poo real bad. James had already explained the noises to the others by the time we all were ready for our different adventures. Darren, Wade and Rita just wanted to listen to the radio and chill. Moogie had run off just after lunch, and we decided to go look for him, while also investigating the area of the noises last night. Almost immediately, when we get to the other side of the lake, the hair stands up on the back of my neck. Charles also feels creeped out, but he had an axe. I had a shotgun, and James had his rifle and his .45 holstered on his hip. So we pressed onward, looking for probably a couple of hours. I was mainly trying to see if we could spot any trees that had fallen. Then we made it to the eastern bank of the lake. We were camped on the western side. "Holy shit," Charles says, causing me and James to come rushing over. There, we saw what looked like a human footprint. Just one, but it was very clearly a footprint in the mud, even had a little pool of water still in it. My first thought was Bigfoot, so I took off my boot and compared sizes. I'm a huge guy with pretty large feet, so it wasn't a surprise that my clodhoppers dwarfed this footprint when I put my own print down next to it. But what was weird was the other print. Where the pinky toe would be, it looked like another big toe was there instead. We also found several downed trees, but none that looked recent. So we decided to go around the north of the lake and back to the others, doing a full circle. Mookie was fine. As soon as food smells filled the air, he came running back. And we all had a pretty good day again. Drinking, feasting, and making fun of each other for being paranoid. We heard some gunshots a little close, and then we called out to warn the shooters that there were people and animals nearby. The shooters of us actually went to meet the people, and all of us but Darren and Wade joined the old guy and his wife shooting at whatever we could. Part of me consciously thought, anything that was lurking around sure as hell isn't now. Boy, was I wrong. A brief mention about Charles. Ever since we were kids, Charles has had vivid night terrors. Most of the time, funny. Some of the time, scary. He'd full on sleepwalk and have conversations with you while still asleep. We had all gone to bed. I was one of the first, due to getting like 4 hours of sleep and being quite rum drunk. Hey, who's that? Captain, stay in your tent. Charles, who was sleeping on a tarp by the fire instead of a tent, started shouting. I shot up, grabbed the shotgun, and turned on my flashlight. What's wrong? I shouted, adrenaline filling my entire existence. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Come closer to the fire. No, don't crouch down. Use your words. He keeps shouting, finally stirring awake James and Rita, who were in the tent closest to Charles. What the hell? James calls out. Moogie starts growling, and apparently let off the stink gland again in their tent because him and Rita are like, oh, Moo, gross. There's somebody sneaking up in Captain's tent. Get out here. I start to unzip my tent. Not you, Captain. Stay in there, he's right next to you. Everybody else, to this day, denies hearing this, but I swear, I heard something whisper, Captain, before hearing a twig crunch right outside my tent. James makes it out of his tent, and seconds later, I hear him laughing. It's just the water stump. Charles is just having a night terror. Charles claims he wasn't dreaming, but when I got out and shined the light on the stump, he agreed that that had to be it. We put one of those big jugs of water on top of a stump. It could easily be mistaken for a white shirt, standing in the dark. Satisfied that there wasn't actually anything there, despite my protests, we all went back to bed. Charles stayed in the tent for the rest of the night. I decided to spend the rest of the night on watch. That was one of, if not the most, terrifying nights of my life. I heard more activity in those woods than I had ever heard before. Moogie would wake up and barf multiple times, as I'd hear twigs snapping off in the trees. Then I heard a really big snap that had to have only been about 10 feet away. I jumped to my feet, whipped over to where the noise was, and shined my light. I've seen enough deer ass in my life to know what I saw running from me. What is not normal of deer, however, is they don't stand up and run on their back legs. Moogie howled and snarled. I took aim, letting my light drop, and fired. I didn't care that it turned to run. I unloaded, boom after boom after boom, until I ran out of all 6 shells I had loaded. Everyone else was freaking out and rushed out of their tents. I told them what happened, and nobody went back to bed until the morning. Nothing else happened that night. I think Moogie refusing to leave the tent was what allowed the others to take me seriously enough. He was a brave dog, sweet, but if mean dogs messed with him at the park, he knew how to throw down. The last thing that happened, on that last day, Darren and Wade went to bury the bucket after putting some fresh new supplies in it. They'd always known where the cache was buried because there was a stump that they used as a landmark. That stump was just gone. It was there when we retrieved the cache 2 days prior, but now it was vanished. No signs of it being uprooted, dragged, or disturbed. It simply was as though it never existed. We all thought we made a mistake until we found the hole for the bucket, still dug and with the little poncho stuffed in it. Well, I'm never coming back here now, so we may as well take this with us, Darren said, and we all left after lunch. That is why I will never even go hiking in the Cascade Wilderness without a firearm and at least 2 other people who know how to use them.